morning to you. Thank you for finding time to be with us. The show is Good Morning Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and as usual, it is a pleasure to have you in board. The 6th of December 2022. I'll start by taking us through the headlines of the leading newspapers from Kenya, and then some from the region, and then we will get into the news. The Star newspaper, why Cherera and Nyang'aya opted to resign. One factor is the consequences of being found guilty by our tribunal. The stories on page 4 and 5. Family's painful 4-year search for missing son. You'll find that on page 2. At the main pictorial, TSC boss takes boat try to deliver KCSE exam papers to Ireland. Okay, and NCPB on the spot after 270 million Kenya shillings fertilizer disappears from stores. That is on page 6. We turn our attention to the Standard newspaper. Raila seeks to ride on Ruto's failed pledges as Azimio leader to lead a national conversation on governance and performance of the president and his cabinet. During several rallies, he has called a move that has thrust him into limelight, but government officials says he wants to cause chaos and roll back economic gains. The story is on page 6. Guilty, Oswago to pay for IEBC ballot scandal. That story is on page 4. What Russia oil cap means for market. You'll find that on the Financial Standard inside. And they were a model family everyone admired, relatives of a mother who was killed alongside her 2 daughters by her husband say they are yet to come to terms with the murders as their relatives lived their lives to the full in America. That story is on page 3. Let's turn our attention now to some papers across the region, and the Sowetan from South Africa, how cereals defense is taking shape. Pretoria News also from South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa must make way for Mabuza. And then the Daily Monitor, Kagame Tshisekedi exchange hot words. And the New Vision from Uganda as well. 2026 polls, NRM stops early campaigns. Newsday, that is from Zimbabwe, Zim's power situation dire. The Daily News from Zimbabwe, Chamisa meets his defiant MPs as CCC row over $40,000 housing loans boils over. The Nation from Nigeria, Tinubu points way forward on power, security and others. The Guardian from Nigeria, 7 years after Buhari falters on 24 million jobs promises. The Citizen from Tanzania targets upper middle status by 2050. The Times, this is from Rwanda. Rwanda mining potential is yet to be fully exploited, and that is according to the Prime Minister there. So that is what we have, and some of the papers from across the region. Let's get into the detailed news, and we start from South Africa. A parliamentary sitting set on Tuesday to debate a Dunning report that found that South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa may have violated the constitution has been postponed by a week. The report said Mr. Ramaphosa allegedly covered up a theft at his farm. He has denied any wrongdoing, and his spokesman said the report was flawed. Parliament Programming Committee met on Monday night and unanimously agreed to hold the debate on the 13th December to allow members of Parliament to travel to Cape Town, where Parliament sits. Debate on the report could decide whether to impeach President Ramaphosa, although the ruling ANC party has announced it would vote against such an attempt. The president had on Monday moved to court to seek an order declaring any steps taken by Parliament following the release of the report as invalid and unlawful. If granted, the order would apply to the vote by members of Parliament and whether to launch impeachment proceedings. And still on that, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially filed court papers to have a report which found he may have violated the country's constitution reviewed. Mr. Ramaphosa wants the Constitutional Court to declare the findings of the panel unlawful and set them aside. He further states that the panel went beyond its scope when looking at whether he had a case to answer related to a robbery at his Phala Phala farm. In the papers, the president is also asking the court to declare that any steps taken by Parliament on the back of the release of the report to be declared unlawful and invalid. The report is due to be debated by members in Parliament, but it was postponed with a week. Opposition party leaders have said they will use the opportunity to call for the establishment of a committee to look into the impeachment of the president. And we go to Libya. And Libya's Tripoli-based government of national unity has invited international oil companies holding contracts with the state oil firm to resume working in the country. Production has frequently halted over the last decade following invasions of oil sites by armed groups and protesters. Tensions have been fueled by an ongoing battle for power and resources between rival administrations in the west and east of the country. Libya has Africa's largest crude oil reserves and is desperate to increase production to fund much-needed investment in housing, transport and electricity networks. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says he had a productive conversation with Rwandan President Paul Kagame to emphasize the need for peace and security in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. But Rwanda says that despite the good discussions, there are still differences in understanding of the issue. In a statement on Twitter, Foreign Minister Vincent Biruta said a wrong and misguided approach by the international community had made the problem worse. On Monday, the U.S. urged Rwanda to end its support for the M23 rebel group in Democratic Republic of Congo in line with the resolutions made during the talks of the conflict held recently in the Angolan capital, Luanda. Rwanda, which denies supporting the rebels, said the responsibility ought to be placed on the DR Congo, which he described as being shielded from accountability. Fighting between the Congolese military and the M23 has intensified in recent months, displacing close to 400,000 people. Leaders from countries in the region have been holding talks to try to end the violence. And police in Senegal are searching for two opposition lawmakers who attacked a female member of parliament during a brawl in parliament last week. Massata Sam slapped Amin Diame and Mamadou Niang kicked her in the stomach during a Justice Ministry budget vote on Thursday. Ms. Ndiaye then threw a chair at Mr. Sam before the Speaker suspended proceedings. Prosecutors in Dakar have launched proceedings against the two male members of Parliament. The violence in Parliament was widely condemned in Senegal and came during an annual UN-backed awareness campaign about violence against women and girls, and the Parliament proceedings are being aired live on the leading newspaper, television stations there in Senegal during that time. And then we head over to Sudan. The military leaders in Sudan have agreed to hand back power to civilian groups in a significant move to end the ongoing political crisis. A transitional 2-year period led by civilian leaders was agreed in a deal unveiled in the capital, Khartoum. But pro-democracy protesters who have been staging regular street protests against the army have rejected it. Sudan has been gripped by crisis since the army overthrew longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir in 2019. After his removal in 2019, the military and civilian leaders, represented by a coalition called Forces of Freedom and Change, agreed to form a joint transitional government. The uneasy union ended late last year when the military overthrew the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. He was reinstated in office earlier this year, but resigned following mass protests opposed to his power-sharing deal with the military. On Monday, there were cheers in the presidential palace in Khartoum after the military generals and the civilian leaders signed the latest deal. Military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan appeared to share the audience sentiments when he repeated a popular revolutionary slogan, "The military belongs to the barracks." Someone is being played, but we will talk about that in a short bit. Unidentified gunmen have kidnapped Benue State Commissioner for Housing and Urban Development, Ekpe Agbu, and two fellow passengers. Police have confirmed they had been traveling back from church when it happened. Benue State official Terba Akase told the local media. According to local reports, the kidnapping took place at Adankari Junction on the Okpo-Ado Road, the fourth known abduction in that same spot. It is not known who the gunmen are or what their motives are, but kidnappings for ransom are often seen by armed bandits as a quick and easy way to get some money. We go to Chad, and a court in Chad has handed jail terms of up to 3 years to more than 260 people who were arrested after deadly protests in October. The mass trial took place in a high-security prison in the desert. Defense lawyers boycotted proceedings, arguing that the trial itself was not legal. More than 400 people faced charges, including taking part in an unauthorized gathering and disturbing public order. Officials said about 50 people died during October nationwide pro-democracy democracy protest, including 10 members of the security forces. Rights groups said more than 100 people were killed by security forces. And then the Swiss-based mining company Glencore has said it will pay up to $180 million to the Democratic Republic of Congo to cover for any corruption claims. The agreement with the Congolese government covers an 11-year period from 2007 to 2018. It is the latest in a series of corruption cases which has seen Glencore agree to pay more than $1.6 billion in fines this year. In May, the company admitted bribing officials in several African countries, including Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, following an investigation by American, British, and Brazilian authorities. Glencore says it's learned from its past mistakes and now operates within the law. Despite the vast fines, Glencore is expected to make a record multi-million-dollar profit this year. And the first shipment of grain as part of Ukraine's own initiative to supply countries in need arrived on Monday in Djibouti for delivery to neighboring Ethiopia amid the region's worst drought in decades. Ukraine's embassy in Ethiopia confirmed that the grain from Ukraine shipment of 25,000 tons is separate from a United Nations World Food Programme effort that has funded humanitarian grain shipment from Ukraine. A second ship with 30,000 tons of wheat will be heading to Ethiopia next week, while a third vessel is being loaded with 25,000 tons of wheat bound for Somalia, an embassy statement has said. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky last month announced the initiative aimed at helping countries the most struck by the food crisis. Ukraine has said it plans to send more than 60 ships to Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, Congo, Kenya, Yemen, and other countries. Cameroon's government is saying U.S. authorities is praising U.S. authorities for arresting 3 Cameroonian Americans accused of supporting separatist violence in the country's western regions. The 3 arrested a week ago and indicted by the U.S. Department of Justice allegedly raised funds to abduct persons and use weapons of mass destruction in a foreign country. Cameroon's government has for years been urging the U.S. and Europe to crack down on separatists operating outside the country. Government forces have been battling separatist groups for 5 years now. John Billy Echo, Inspector General in Cameroon's External Relations Ministry, said the arrest of the 3 Cameroonian-born U.S. citizens indicates that the U.S. has come to understand that some people who sponsor the separatist conflict live in America. Cameroonian lawyers in the U.S. say they have filed complaints against 200 Cameroonians and American citizens of Cameroon origin in the U.S. who are suspected accomplices to separatist violence. Armed groups seeking to separate from predominantly English-speaking regions from Cameroon and its French-speaking majority launched their military campaign in 2017. And we go to Burkina Faso. Press freedom groups have condemned Burkina Faso's halting of broadcast by French media outlet Radio France International RFI. Ouagadougou's military leaders linked the ban to RFI reporting that the junta described as false. Critics said the military is seeking to control news and information as it struggles against worsening insecurity. Burkina Faso is the second West African country after Mali to take the French broadcaster off the air. Both countries are under military rule. In a statement, the Burkinabe military junta says Radio France International made false reports pertaining to an alleged foiled coup attempt last week and had given voice to Islamist militants. In the wake of the ban announced on Saturday, RFI issued a separate statement saying it strongly deplores the authorities' action and will explore all avenues to restore the broadcasting. RFI also cited its unwavering commitment to the freedom to inform and to the professional works of journalists. Reporters Without Borders also say the authorities' decision will prevent other journalists from reporting on terrorism and could be illegal. Burkina Faso has been at war with militants linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda for more than 6 years. As the violence has worsened, so has political instability, with the country enduring 2 military coups this year, one in January, one in September. Both juntas have promised to resolve the country's security problems. The latest from South Sudan. The country is preparing to send its troops for the peace mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The 750 forces are part of the East African Community Regional Forces mandated to end the conflict in the eastern DRC. This comes after some EAC member states sent commandants to the volatile eastern DRC, where the March 23 rebel group is increasing their offensive and taking new territories. This year, the heads of the state of the East African Community resolved to send a joint force to deal with multiple armed groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It obliged each member state to deploy forces to the mission. In August, the South Sudan cabinet approved $6.69 million to deploy troops in the neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo as part of directives of the regional bloc to restore peace in the region. The forces are reportedly undergoing final preparations to join their Kenya, Uganda, and Burundi counterparts already in Goma. The Special Battalion of 750 soldiers is a combination of various units of SSPDF, including the Military Force, National Security and Engineering Corps, among others. According to the Presidential Advisor on Security Affairs, the troops will leave Juba for Goma in eastern Congo to join their counterpart from the region soon. Addressing the troops, Tut Gatloek said the mission of the combatants is to restore peace in the war-torn Democratic Republic of Congo. And you know what? I have so much to say about that. Let's just conclude the news, this time from Ethiopia. A published report says Ethiopian guards and villagers massacred 83 Tigrayan prisoners at a camp in the southern Ethiopia last November in what the report calls the deadliest killing of imprisoned soldiers since the Tigray War started more than 2 years ago. The Washington Post said the previously unreported killings occurred on November 21, 2021 at a camp near the town of Mirab Abaya that housed more than 2,000 detained Tigrayan soldiers. Witnesses told the Post that between 16 and 18 guards at the camp opened fire on prisoners late that afternoon, prompting many to flee into the bush, chased by Ethiopian soldiers. The report said after running for an hour, some escapees came across some locals, begged them for help. Instead, a mob of at least 150 people attacked the Tigrayans with machetes, sticks and stones. Witnesses said members of the mob were incorrectly told the Tigrayans were prisoners of war who were responsible for the death of the local men in the military. The Post said none of the soldiers killed had been combatants against Ethiopian forces. The attacks happened at a time when Tigrayan forces were advancing toward the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. Prisoners interviewed for the story speculated that the attacks were triggered by fear or desire for revenge. The bodies of the 83 Tigrayans were dumped in a mass grave outside the prison camp, according to witnesses. The Post said it interviewed more than 24 people, including prisoners, medical personnel, officials and local relatives for the story that was published on Monday. The war between Ethiopia's central government and the northern Tigrayan region broke out in November 2020. The sides are currently working out details of a ceasefire agreement, and I think the ceasefire agreement is going on just fine. So you are now up to date. Thank you so much. About 26 minutes past 10 a.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. I'm joined by Wanda Wesonga from Nairobi. Wanda, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Miriam. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Good to have you this morning.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I'm sure you were listening to some of these stories. I just want us to start off from the last story I just did. Washington Post, a very credible, international media newspaper from the U.S., was doing some investigative piece in Ethiopia. During this conflict that went on for over 2 years. Media was largely blocked. There was no access to that area, and international media houses, others were banned, others were but the government could not allow for access in that area. So when you hear of such a story, this investigative piece by the Washington Post, then you wonder how many of such cases perhaps happen. So they're saying about 83 men, I think, were murdered. Tigrayan prisoners were murdered in the most gruesome way. Just the description there, going through that story. And so you wonder, even as right now, the mediation process is going on well. The disarmament, agreement that was agreed upon on the 2nd of November, I think it's holding and it's going on well. And things seems to be coming back to track slowly. But this is just one example of perhaps the many atrocities that happen under the blockade that was imposed on that region, and there's no telling how many of these cases are there. So even as we look at coming together and mediation process going on just well, where does accountability come in? Because we know a lot happened. So do we just mediate, then move on because people have shook hands and there seems to be some level of peace, or the issues that were happening during this period, and even the Tigrayan forces have been accused of committing some levels of atrocities. So at some point, will they be able for the country to really find true healing and reconciliation with itself? Are we just going to gloss over some issues like this?
Thank you so much. What happens in Ethiopia and what we are getting right now, and based on your question, there are times when you only need to know what happened, then you let go and learn from it. Like I'll compare it with the apartheid in South Africa. That when Mandela took over in 1994, he realized that if he wanted to punish the pro-apartheid, then the country will get back to square zero. So what he decided to do with Desmond Tutu, it's to have people tell the story, what happened, what they witnessed, how they
we are having a problem. Wonder.
While they fought back, then can you hear me?
We're having a problem with your reception there. You're not very clear, but you can try one more time and see. Yes.
Let me do. Now, can you hear me at that point?
I think you're clear now. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So kindly then allow me to
yes.
Switch off the video so that thank you. Now, when at times it only needs people to know what happened, how they wronged each other, how they were able to hurt each other, then learn from it. That there are times when you want to punish someone based on what they did, then you might end up leading into, you might end up creating another issue again. When you look into, when you compare the two scenarios, World War I and the apartheid in South Africa, World War II was only fought because Adolf Hitler looked at what had happened, looked at the reparations, then decided to revenge because the Versailles meeting.
The Treaty of Versailles that really put tough conditions on Germany, yes. Was not very fair for Germany, yes.
Exactly. So when you look at the punishment that came with the Treaty of Versailles, it was a case of now getting down on the ground to punish someone based on the mistake that they did. But when Adolf Hitler looked at it, he felt like, no, this is too much. I have to fight back. It led to the Second World War. Therefore, when you compare now the Ethiopian and the World War I, then the nation will heal. But if they go the Versailles Treaty way, then they will have another second war. So in this case, I'll advise that yes, we have people that were directly involved in this. You have people that led to all this, but based on their positions, some of them are either senior persons. You punish them, they might lead to another conflict again. Miriam.
But how about we look at the Rwandan way? Because, the situations are different. I know we're drawing comparison between the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed between Germany and the other allied nations. But that was between nations. That was a bit different. But this is an internal matter,
Yeah.
like what perhaps happened in Rwanda, and we can't, they don't compare really, because Rwanda, that was a genocide. But what was happening in Ethiopia also is it could be equivalent to that. A lot really, really happened, and it's just now that perhaps that region is being opened up that we will really learn to know the magnitude of some of the things that were going on there under the blockade. So why can't they take perhaps later on, after everything has whatever the process they're doing right now, the Rwandan approach, because people were hurt. And not just the government forces that committed these atrocities, even the TPLF side, they've been accused of committing, and other players, other actors in this conflict. So for the interest of healing and reconciliation, you can't just, can you just gloss over that? There has to be a way, a mechanism, perhaps the Rwandan way. Maybe people will not go to jail, because anyway, the buck will stop with the head of the country. You know, if now we have to look at it like that, because who sent the national army to that area? You know, so might mention a lot of people, but for the interest of just healing and reconciling the country, I mean, conversations must be had. You know, maybe not in the not to have people go to jail. I don't know, but maybe just to hear each other, and maybe to just ask for forgiveness, or maybe to just aid in the process of healing, because now there are people who have been affected and are going through a lot of trauma there. Does that not
exactly
count?
Exactly. I'll pick exactly on what you're saying, that if people are allowed to talk and forgive each other, that's exactly what Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu decided to do. They let people talk and forgive each other. When you look at what happened in Rwanda, it's a bit different. Rwanda decided to at least to change the battlegrounds. Then they went to the eastern part of Congo. That today we are having President Paul Kagame having an issue with the rebel group, that is the FDLR as a team, and he's still hunting them. He wants to fight them. In this case, people never forgave each other. Instead, they only transferred the battlegrounds from the DRC Congo to the eastern part of from Rwanda to the eastern part. What probably Ethiopians needs is only people to talk, forgive each other. But once they introduce that statement of wanting to hold people accountable, wanting to punish people based on what happened, chances are they might go back again, because I feel like the big boys were the ones who were involved in this.
Mm-hmm. So that means even Eritrea will just get off scot-free with its involvement. Okay, I know it's a very, and maybe it's just early to start looking at this. So perhaps that some level of accountability, I think, probably must happen moving forward, and maybe just find a way of healing and reconciling the people of Ethiopia together. Because if certain things are not really addressed, you look at South Africa, you brought it up several times. Those people are not healed, and sometimes they misdirect their anger to their fellow Africans. You see how that xenophobia plays out there, and how erratic they can be sometimes, the majority of the population of the blacks, which tells you these are people who are still traumatized and are still going through a lot of the effects of that apartheid is still there, that denied these people opportunities and better chances to go to have a good education and things like that. So we see how that is playing out there. So as much as forgive and forget and let's move on, but in the long run, the effects might be there. So I just hope that Ethiopia finds a way to reconcile with itself, because that is one country. So I just hope that is part of what they have as far as this mediation and working, having that relationship back in their country is concerned. They must work on some level of accountability and healing. Yes. Okay, so let's just leave that there. And we look at this story from South Sudan. our good neighbor. So South Sudan is preparing to send troops to the peace mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. About 750 forces, they are being readied, and they should be deployed soon to the DRC to help in quelling the tensions and the conflict there. So they're being sent by the peace mission. And I'll just quote what the chief of the defense forces of SSPDF, General Santino Ndeng, said. He urged the commandants to restore peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. All right, so I'll just look at their statements one by one. And South Sudan has always been a country of interest to me. And it fascinates me. It fascinates me because the president of South Sudan, President Salva Kiir, was the one who was leading peace efforts between Sudan's government, and they also had some rebel groups there. And the president, Salva Kiir, was doing very well as far as the mediation process in Sudan is concerned. And then you come back home in South Sudan itself and you see how miserably they have failed in trying to find a solution to their own problem. And as much as I do understand South Sudan has a responsibility as being part of the East African community to also send troops to the Democratic Republic of Congo, because that is what the member states agreed to do. Kenya already has sent its troops, Uganda has, and Burundi, and now South Sudan is ready. You know, when I was looking at the East African countries and who perhaps was going to send their troops, South Sudan did not ring a bell, because I thought maybe South Sudan has so much to deal with right now as far as its own security is concerned and its own stability is concerned. But this person, the SSPDF General Chief of Defense, is saying, could you just go to the Democratic Republic of Congo and restore peace? The same peace that they can't restore at home. Please help me understand this. But I do understand that they do have a responsibility as far as being part of the East African community is concerned. Is it possible to restore peace somewhere else and you can do it at home?
One, I look at South Sudan having their troops sent to DRC Congo as a case study of peer pressure. That your neighbors are doing this, you also have to do it. The report from UNICEF in that is 2018, and even what is happening today, has it that conflict in Juba has led to at least more than 6 million and above persons in hunger. Therefore, this is a country that is still not very stable. But now you do what your neighbors are doing. It's a case of we are now in Rome, behave the way Romans are behaving. I feel like I wish what Dr. Masanga at some point was trying to talk about, that instead of now doing what we are doing as a region, where a country probably is being pushed to send their troops because the others are doing the same, that we then have one, at least we have a structure that will have the regional military. The regional military, where a country does not just send their own troops, but it becomes a mandate.
But we do have an East African force, by the way. It's called what? It doesn't. Its mandate is not very clear, but we do have.
Probably I look at how it is structured. Mm-hmm. Is it structured that it is, the funding, the personnel, everything, that this team is based somewhere?
It's called standby force.
Yes, like a standby force where a nation will not just tell us that we have volunteered to have 1,000 of our men, 2,000 of our men, but that it is a mandatory that for as long as you are a member, you must contribute this number of military guys, like Dr. Masanga was putting it, to the commandos, such that these commandos will now serve and be employees or be employees of East Africa, but not a certain country. I feel like what we are having is not that. It's not that one. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if we had, what South Sudan is doing, to me, I feel like it's pressure that your friends are doing it, you also have to do it. And I don't feel like it was a good move, or it is a good move. Mm-hmm. South Sudan has a lot on their table that they should be addressing.
Okay. And what perhaps made my head spin a little bit is in August, the South Sudan cabinet approved $6.69 million to deploy troops in the neighboring republic, Democratic Republic of Congo. So they approved a good amount of money. South Sudan is a country that it's even unable to meet its obligations in the East African Community bloc. And I think yesterday I had one of those news pieces here. We didn't get too much into it. South Sudan is unable to take care of its people, of itself, of its obligation. Are they approving 6.69 million to send troops to the DRC while they need this money at Akamani peer pressure? I think if South Sudan went to the EAC Secretariat and said, hey, as much as we are part of this bloc and we would love to support our brothers and sisters in the DRC, but, we are unable to do that because we know even their own economic situations does not allow them to be even spending this much money to send soldiers away while they need the same money at home to feed South Sudanese.
What happens in Africa, what happens in Africa is what we call the African chauvinism man. That the chauvinist man in the South Sudanese is like, we also have to show that, we also have to confirm to these guys that we exist. There are times, and then you look at the kind of the mismanagement that happens in African countries. Apart from the fact that we pay quite a lot to our politicians, we also spend quite a lot on anything that has to do with fighting, buying weapons and all those things. Therefore, I'll not be surprised that they set aside some good amount of $6.6 million, an investment that is going into fighting. Therefore, it is a problem that cuts across African nations. That African nations, I don't know what happens, that we love fighting and we love paying quite a lot of politicians. Therefore, South Sudanese involvement in this, it's simply the African nature.
Okay. Now, there's still some things I need to fully understand about this story. So, the Chief of Defense Forces of SSPDF, General Santino, also said, this is what he said, General Santino Ndang, you're going to the mission because our fellow citizens in East Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, has suffered since 1962. They live in turmoil. I don't know how long the people of South Sudan have suffered and they've been living in turmoil. We have sat down as the forces of the East African community and we want to rescue citizens in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is all right. I'm sure that with your arrival, the Congolese citizens will return to their areas and you will stand beside them. And not only you, but there are many forces of the East African community who are already deployed on the ground. And it deployed for the first time for South Sudanese forces to be deployed on a foreign mission since independence. And so I do understand. I totally understand the position of the government of South Sudan because of its being a member of the East African community. However, Comer, the place which is troubling my mind, you can see that they have real intentions, good intentions, and they can really feel for the people of Democratic Republic of Congo who have been suffering, and whatever that has been going on in the DRC is appalling. The massacre, the infliction of pain and suffering to the civilians who have nothing to do with what is happening there. And they're saying now you go, the people of Congo have suffered. And then I'm reminded of how much the people of the South Sudan have suffered. Good number of them are still in refugee camps. Good number of them are still moving out of their villages and trying to find safer places to stay because of the increased communal violence, and some of which are sponsored by the government itself. And now this general is saying you can go and help these people return to their areas, which is a good thing, and that is our prayer and that is our wish. But where does such a mind and such a heart comes when they are looking at their own people? Because when they're looking at when they're discussing the issue of South Sudan, you never see this level of concern. You never see this level of empathy. You never see, because otherwise things will be different in South Sudan. So I guess it is easier to understand the pain of what your neighbor is going through, but you would overlook what is happening in your own house. And as much as the intentions are good, and I appreciate even South Sudan for even wanting to do this and doing this, but can we have that same level of concern to their own people? Can we have that level of sympathy to the people of South Sudan that continue to suffer unnecessarily? Can we have that level of wanting to secure the people of South Sudan from the forces themselves? Because as we know now, and every day, right now, go and check on the news that is coming from South Sudan. Several people were murdered in such and such a place. Houses were burned down. Things are still happening. And yet the security operators in South Sudan don't seem to have its house in order. So you cannot convince me that you're busy going to another country, trying to ensure the citizens are okay and can go back to their homes and sleep at night, while at your own house, that is not what is happening. You cannot tell me that their lives matter more than the lives of your own people. That same level of responsibility, that same level of concern, that same level of love and empathy that you're taking to DRC, which is absolutely wonderful. I would love to see that being shown and being directed to the people of South Sudan. So I think that is the problem I have with the leadership and the government of South Sudan and its approach as far as trying to handle matters at home is concerned. So I'm just having a hard time just understanding why now they have a different attitude and a different approach when it comes to another country that they lack when they're dealing with their own issues at home.
I don't want to imagine that probably it has something to do with our president, Dr. William Ruto, going there, because our president was in South Sudan the other day. Then when you look at our region as per now, we're having something to do with the positioning of countries, trying to pick an ally. That when you look at today, if you point today a country that is too close to Uganda, then chances are all of us will say Rwanda. That if you attack Uganda, chances are Rwanda will also attack you, or Rwanda will likely help Uganda to attack you. The other day, General Mohozi tweeted and said, don't underestimate my uncle, Paul Kagame. And if you attack my uncle, you are equally attacking us, Ugandans. We'll fight you. Therefore, I don't imagine that it has something. I mean, South Sudan going to DRC Congo, that is the army, has something to do with our president going there. But I equally not walk very far from such kind of thinking, because you look at it, it's not just an act of goodwill, it is hypocritical. If it was an act of goodwill, then you first ensure that your sons and daughters in your home are satisfied, they're eaten, they're full, before you want to go and feed your neighbor's children. That you cannot go and feed your neighbor's children when yours are sleeping hungry. Therefore, it is hypocritical and not an act of goodwill. And probably it could be having something to do with the regional repositioning or positioning of our region, where a country wants to pick another country as a friend or as a neighbor, but in military case. Like today, we're having a military good rapport between Uganda and Rwanda. So probably South Sudan are also trying to put their feet in this kind of positioning. Because I don't believe it's just an act of goodwill. Neither do I believe that it's just hypocritical, but I believe it has an agenda that we're not, it can't just be placed on the table for every person to see and read it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The level of hypocrisy. The intentions are okay. But no, you can't go feeding your neighbor's kids while yours are going without food in your house. It does not make any kind of sense. So in the similar way, they're feeling bad for the civilians in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I would like to see that level of empathy to their own people. That has been lacking. The power play in South Sudan has always been very egocentric. Who gets what position? They have 5 vice presidents, for heaven's sakes. They can't even afford to pay them, but they have 5. And I try to understand, because I think that was their way of addressing the issue of inclusivity. But that has not solved any problem. They keep postponing elections. They keep postponing things. They refuse to show some will in implementing quickly the revitalized peace of 2018. They have no will to try to do good by the people of South Sudan. They're dragging their feet. And now you want to tell us that the people of DRC are making you so unhappy, and perhaps you can't sleep well and you want to go help them, and that is good. But you cannot see the amount of suffering the people are going through, even in the internally displaced refugee camps inside South Sudan. There are people who have left their homes. There's no security there. They languish in deplorable conditions. When you look at the videos and the news coming from there, I sympathize, and you wonder, how does the leadership in this country sleep at night, sit down and talk politics from Monday to Monday, and just address their own issues and benefit from the oil process that is supposed to be helping their people, but instead goes to a few pockets? And they are able to sleep well at night while their people go through what they're going through. I have never really been able to wrap my mind around that. And all they fight about are positions. All they fight about is who is getting what and who is benefiting from what. But the interest of the people of South Sudan has never been, something that they focus on so much. So, all right, they're saying we're going to rescue the citizens in the DRC. Could you try and rescue your own citizens first? Could you try to ensure that your people feel safe enough to return to their homes and start rebuilding their homes? Can you see that your citizens get justice, set up the South Sudan's hybrid court that you have refused to set up, that was going to be part of the accountability process for healing and reconciliation to happen in South Sudan? When is that going to happen? South Sudan has so much to deal with on its plate, and so and then to think about Parliament approving $6.69 million to go, send their troops to the DRC. That money would go a long way in addressing very important and urgent needs for the people of South Sudan. That is just not, it's just how I feel. And it's my personal opinion and feelings, but this is not to downplay at all the suffering and the nightmare that the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo who live in this area are going through. And I think a country like Kenya is able to send its troops. It has sent, and other stakeholders are doing the best they can, and they have done that, and we should continue supporting, those peace efforts. South Sudan perhaps should have taken its time and just sort out its issues first before thinking it was a wonderful thing to send its troops there. But I also do understand its obligation as, being a member of the East African community, but still I'm just having a lot of difficulties understanding where their priorities are. Their priorities are just somewhere out there, I guess. Okay, I guess we'll have to stop. Would you like to say something? Then we can wrap it up.
In fact, just like one line, that it's very funny. Like when you read the Human Rights Watch report on South Sudan, it even accuses the military for violating the rights of women and girls.
Yeah.
That the military, that is the government forces,
they rape the women as a means of rewarding themselves after they've fought.
Yeah, like therefore it's so funny because there have had cases of rape. I don't know the gun rape, of which any other time these guys are put in a military court or civilian trials. There is cases of impunity coming in. Therefore, the same way you're surprised that these things are happening or shocked that these things are happening, it is true, and you're very right a lot. Human Rights Watch report. It has quite a lot of, South Sudan has quite a lot of challenges, from the violence against the civilians. You get into address the violence against women and girls, the attacks on the aid workers. You get into the arbitrary detention and freedom of media, quite a lot. Therefore, South Sudan are not being
and a lot
sincere.
of this are perpetrated by the army themselves, according to those reports that have
Exactly.
And now they're going to protect and bring peace another place. I think South Sudan needs to put its house in order.
Very true.
I can't. I can't even. Let's just leave this conversation here. We'll revisit it later. Thank you so much, Wanda, because we have to give way to our next show. We shall be looking at agribusiness across the continent of Africa. How can we probably pay attention to this, and how can we address the issue of food insecurity that we know is very rampant here? I've seen Ukraine has brought a couple of tons for fertilizers here in Africa. I think they're competing with Russia. The other time, Wanda, I remember we were talking, and Russia had given Africa a good amount of tons of fertilizer as well. So I think it's just international relations at play here, and they're trying to appease and just to, I don't know, it's crazy. But don't go too far. We shall be back on top of the hour, and we shall be looking at agribusiness across the continent of Africa, and we shall have a special guest with more knowledge of the subject who will share with us some information that could be vital as far as that is concerned. Thank you so much. My name is Miriam Mugutu. This has been Good Morning Africa. Thank you so much, Wanda Wesonga. Enjoy the rest of your day. Good morning.